Hi, this is Matthew Walsh and I'm doing my CA3 screencast for multiplayer distributed games programming. So just to start off with, I'm going to go through quick play of the game and show you what's working and what's not. So this is currently connected to the server. So you can move around. All the player movement is in the different all the different elements of the game work, bar the towers. Yeah, so everything updates on the server. Barring the turrets, there was a small issue with that. There's actually not this much lag normally in the build, but I've had to open a previous version of it. For some reason there was a compiler error when I got home, but it's been seen working in the demo. Yeah, so a few of the issues that I kind of had with the game, is the way that the towers have transitioned. They haven't gone over correctly, so they don't update despite being implemented the same way everything else is, and I don't really know why. If the blue character hits the bottom left turret, they all turn off. Again, unknown issue. But other than that, the game works over client for 2 players. So I'm just going to go through the code. So starting with the client code, I used Space War clients and Space War server as my starting point. So for my classes for sending data over, I had used the torpedo class as kind of a template for that, so creating these structs and then defining what values needed to be sent over with that, and then added in the get net data and the set net data into the Nexus class, into the timer tower class, and use that to send it across. Also added it to the health class for the health pickup. So it's rinse and repeat across the board for creating those structures, and obviously just making small changes in the get net data and the set net data based on what values need to be sent. Let's have a look here. So I then redefine another structure of enemies, timer state, tower state, health state, and nexus state, and again just data to be sent. So the changes since the last time, with the 2 client STC, just defining out an array of players, an array of enemies from the enemy struct, and then a single instance of the rest. And then we have the UCAR for sounds, which are used for the bit flags. Same as the 2 server STC. So since the last year, I updated everything, so it's all going into an array. So we have our array of players, array of torpedoes, we have enemies are an array, nexuses, and towers, they're all an array. After that, it was just updating all the different variables that I had from my game that needed to be added to the Space War games to change it over and make the swap. So I did that. I then continued making changes, adding in the new textures, updating everything so that it all used the array values for it, round start timers. Then when we look at setting button states, we're going to be using the bit flag, so the forward bit, left bit, right bit, fire bit. These are defined with 8 zeros, 7 zeros and a 1 in different placements, and then they are NORed together to find where the 1 is, to see if the data was sent reliably. As far as a bandwidth estimation goes, this may be wrong, but just from my understanding of it, the number of players multiplied by the variables that need to be sent over to the player. So it's 4 by 7, 4 bits for each variable, so our floats. And then there's 7 instances of that across the player that need to be sent, and plus 1 for what sound to be sent over, so that's the UCAR sound. Then it's multiplied by 30 for the amount of frames, and multiplied by 8 to put it into bits. The enemy data, tower data, nexus data, and health data all total up to 56 bits. And the bandwidth then being sent is 3,480 bytes and 56 bits. So I wanted to show a contrast between the client and server. So when you boot up, the ships are updating on the client side, but they're just moving around aimlessly, no collision whatsoever. And then on the server side, they're completely stationary, so then they get updated across from one another, but it actually caused a little bit of a jitter between the player and server, so that just needs to be commented out for actual gameplay. There's no AI, no collisions, all done on the server side, and the draw is just pretty straightforward. So just moving down to sending our data over to the server. It comes in here from get info from server. So we get our ship and which is our player, and the torpedo data from both sides. Sorry, from the server, from both sides, as in both characters. It'll then go through for each enemy to see which their X and Y position is and whether they're currently set to active and visible. Same for the nexus, timer, health, and then towers. This tower was updated in a later version. So that it loops through all the towers, which just as I said, there was an unknown issue when I booted up to do the screencast, which is strange because there were no changes made since I got from class. And yeah, so that's everything on the client side. If move over to the server, the server's changed in the exact same way. Added in all the get data, set data. Everything works the exact same way. Everything is copied over the same, except in the actual spacewar.cpp. We now have all the collisions. They're all in there, all the checks. And this is coming in from just receiving the buttons, and then it's ANDed to get whether it is the forward bit or the side bit or the fire bit, and that's checking for the 1. So we also have our 2 client data, which is just sending over data that needs to be sent. It's data that needs to be sent to the client is then defined based on the input. So I changed all the input variables in the Space War server to match what my game did, and then update the entities. So when looking at everything else for sending the data, it's set up in the same way, but it differs from the client in that when we do the prepare prepare the data for the client, we're just going to loop through and we're going to add this to the stack of 2 client data. So the data on the player, and then ship data, the torpedo data, etc. It's all going to be sent over, as well as the nexus, health, tower states. I'm not sure why the tower state came out. Maybe it's something in this loop that didn't quite work. That the tower data was only getting the data for the single tower in the bottom left and not for all 4. That would be my guess as to why. But again, yeah, just defining states and defining the data. So that's pretty much everything on the server side. So I was reading over some documentation I found online just to kind of get an overview of what needed to be done and the theory about it and all that. I just thought that it was going to be I thought it was going to be something else when I opened that. I thought I had something else open. So I'm just going to run the client again and how the game is set up, or how it should be set up for future client connections. Now as you can see, they're just moving around, nothing else is moving, there's no functionality that all comes from the server. But when adding new players to the game, it should be an adding and then moduload 2, and then if the remainder is 0, then they're on the red side, and if the remainder is 1, then they're on the blue side. So add players that way. Always having the same sprites and movement across the board. So that's how the game should have been adapted for more players. But as is, the game actually didn't need to be adapted for more than one player, because collision checks are all the same. And as far as from a mobile game perspective goes, it's always a set map like this, and they don't really change based on how many players are involved. It could be 5v5, but the same setup is still necessary. The only other way that I could have adjusted the game is to say if it was a 5v5 and it was supporting 10 players, possibility to either make the tower stronger based on how many players there are, or add in more towers to defend. But that would be about it. There was actually no real changes to be made for that would be. I wouldn't have to make any more changes to the game based on more players. So yeah, that's my screencast for this. Thank you very much.